what I'm doing should not be perceived as extreme, but it is.
It is,
which
yeah.
is ridiculous. Is there anything more important than the shit that we put in our mouth every single day? Remove any processed foods, nothing in a packet. The ingredient should be one single ingredient, not a list of 40 things and half of them that you can't even read. You can go down that path and call this a conspiracy theory, but on us, like, you don't need to be a genius to realize that unfortunately most things are driven by profit or some sort of gain. Anthony Minicello, I don't know if you ever heard him talk about his diet. He only eats slow cooked meat. His protein shakes are raw milk and eggs. He wouldn't have Gatorade out on the field. He'd have coconut water with salt. The stress built up and the autoimmune disease, which is Crohn's disease, got to a point where he was hospitalized. Now, the crazy thing about this is, in that appointment, he was offered medication, he was offered surgery, not one conversation about nutrition. This is a gut disorder. And people who are anxious, it's hypervigilance. So they're always reacting. They're always very responsive. They're always in fight or flight. We're going to need to train them and rewire their neural patterns and their nervous systems. Most people that I've seen, and as you mentioned, I've worked with a lot of people, they're not getting enough protein. Try having a high protein, high fat meal for breakfast and watch your day completely change.
And what sort of foods or ingredients should people be avoiding in their diet just to make some positive changes? And then what sorts of ingredients or foods do you think that people could increase in their diet to make their, mood, energy levels, performance feel better?
Great question.
All right, guys, welcome back. I had a lot of fun with this episode. We had Sandor Earl in the house. We talk about a lot of things, a little bit controversial for some people. Some people will call them health conspiracies. Some will call them health truths. We had a really big discussion about water, fluoride, seed oils, antiperspirants, all that sort of stuff. He's all animal-based diet, and I've been veggie for 5 years, so really good balanced conversation around all those things. I really enjoyed it. For some of you, it'll be brand new information. For others, you'll be like, bro, this is not new news. I'd really love to hear in the comments what you guys think, because it's a lot of really interesting stuff for me. So we'll get into the pod in a second, but can I ask for a few favors before we do. If you're listening on YouTube, could you like this video? Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could leave me a 5-star review, I'd really appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to everyone who's been doing it recently. The podcast has been going really, really well. So super grateful. Let's get into it. All right, welcome back. Another episode. We got another part 2, brother. I've been looking forward to this one. Going to talk about a lot of different things than we did last time. Now, for those that don't know, I'm Sandor Earl, massive advocate for altitude training. He's the performance coach and pretty much the face of Airlocker. I see you everywhere I look these days. You're a resilience coach. You run the Mind and Body Success Blueprint, which has seen over 15,000 success stories. So we'll spend a bit of time on that. I think big theme of this podcast is health. You've learned a lot over the last few years. I've opened my eyes to a lot. And part of that is you co-founded Animal Fuel. I'm super keen to chat about all that. Really interested. And as a veggie, I haven't eaten meat for 5 years, bro. I haven't eaten meat for 5 years, but I still love all this shit. Like, I'm actually the 8th of December is my 5 years on the dot. After that, I'm going to do my 5 years, and then I'm going to allow myself to try other foods. Yeah, you shocked? Nah, I'm just I don't want to commit to a decision I made 5 years ago.
Yep.
We'll see. I'll test other foods and see how I feel. I got home from a trip from Europe. This is when I was still living at home. And everyone, you remember the Game Changers documentary?
Yes. That's pretty much turned so many people. I've seen so many athletes make a pivot and it was so convincing at the time.
Yeah.
This was really before the wave of, like we said, information was so accessible. I remember sitting there going, maybe I think I need to go vegan.
Yeah,
I don't think there would have been one person that didn't think about it or actually attempt it.
It's a fucking good documentary. Like, it sells. I've never been full vegan. That's too much of an inconvenience for me. But I haven't eaten meat for 5 years. The thing about me, and I've hear so many different stories and perspectives about like your diet and everything that other people do. I think there's no right or wrong answer. I think everyone's bodies and everyone's methylation systems work different. Try shit. See what actually works best for you. So I'm interested when I start introducing new foods to see how I feel. I actually felt great. Like, I was doing heaps of kung fu, like heaps of martial arts back then. And when I stopped eating meat, I stopped getting sometimes half an hour into a session, your fitness is up here, but you're just getting those stitches and you feel like shit. It stopped me with that, but I'm really interested. I've seen so much research and data about the benefits of all this other stuff. So keen to dig into some of that. And we were just talking before, also ex-NRL player, which, probably feels like a lifetime ago now.
It does.
How do you reflect the further you get away from your playing career about that whole part of your journey?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like, once you go, rugby league for me was really a bubble. And when I was in that, obviously I had that time away from the game, which was a bit of a blessing because it forced me to break out of the persona of me being the rugby league player. And that's the advice that I give a lot of people. Like, it's the sport that I play. It's not who I am, but it certainly was who I am at some point, right? So when you get out of that and then like what's the next bubble? Then it's Airlocker, and then you're just in this little group where you hang around these people and you're only focused on one thing. So I'm still connected. Obviously, as we said, I connect with the boys on Bloke in a Bar and always got something to do with footy and connection with the Storm and seeing them be successful and stuff like that. But it does feel like a lifetime ago.
I love seeing those Friday Bloke episodes with you. I think got a bit of good chemistry there. What did you think of the grand final? Your first team, I think you played for, and your last team.
Yeah.
How'd you feel watching those? And obviously you're probably a bit more connected to Storm. You feel
Yeah,
these days?
I am. And I feel like obviously it was the last club I was at, and I'm so grateful. If I took it, look, there was no highlight reel or amazing story of football at that point, but man, it's a life-changing experience to be a part of that culture. Like I did a staff development day for a company 2 days ago, and a lot of the lessons that I impart, and it was relative to them, are from the Melbourne Storm. Like it's insane. If you were to put them, what they've achieved across any sport in the world, they'd be right up there. Like that franchise, what they've done, what they've achieved, Craig Bellamy, the players, the team, it's wild. But what Penrith have achieved, four premierships, like, oh, that's crazy. I do feel like there's a bit of a changing of the guard. I watched that game, and back in 2020 was the last time I played a part of that grand final squad. And that was Penrith's first grand final. Very young, very raw. Now you look at last week, and it was Storm had 4 players that have been to grand final. Penrith had 12. So I feel like this might be the start of a new era for the Storm. That whole team continues. They've actually bought a couple players. Penrith get a little bit disjointed. I think this could be a new wave for the Melbourne Storm to start their own kind of run for the next couple of years. I really believe that. And that's what I watched. I was like, oh, I feel like this is that same moment from
it's
4 or 5
almost
years
flipped,
ago.
right? And that, like, but the thing that's so crazy, every year they've lost players and they still show up and do it. This year, everyone was speaking about they're looking tired. A lot of them playing injured. The fact that they got 4 was massive. If they get 5, it's like ridiculous. No Luai, no Fisher Harris. Like surely they can't make that work. But it was just really cool to see like the 2 best teams, and the quality of the grand final was really, really good.
Yeah, we haven't seen that in a while. I don't know if we'll see it again, but it was so cool. But yeah, I just felt like I actually backed Storm. I thought they were in form. I thought with that spine, but you rocked up on game day and they just got it done. They knew how to get it done. They were comfortable there, and it's crazy. How
you mentioned before that period of that period you had out of the game was a blessing. We were just talking off air about kind of navigating the post-playing career and everything you've done now. And that time forced you were starting businesses over there. What was it? I think I may have asked you, but I don't remember. You mentioned what they've built at the Storm and Craig Bellamy. What was the meeting like you had with Craig, if you could remember back then?
I do. So,
and what was it about you that he saw that he's like, I want to bring you to Storm?
Yeah, well, I'd love to ask him, but I seen this random podcast, and I've only seen him do a couple of podcasts. One was actually the other week with the boys,
with
Munster,
the Clubhouse boys. Yeah.
So I saw this podcast. A guy was interviewing him, and he told a story which was mind blowing. And this is the story that we discussed. So I reached out to Craig and I wrote him a letter, because I was like, I don't want my manager to get in contact with him. So, but maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah.
Wrote him a letter and basically said, this is who I am. This is what obviously the story was, and this is what I think I can bring to the club. Couple days later, he calls me, which was already, I was like, holy shit. And he's like, let's catch up. So a few days again, we catch up at the cafe. Now the story goes with this podcast, what he does is he takes players or potential players to the cafe and they order, and he literally watches them, whether they say please and thank you. And I was like, holy shit. To hear that, 6, 7 years later, I was like, wow. And of course, like I know I just think it's not only a part of who I am, but strategically, like I get obsessed with, when you go to a coffee shop and there's a barista that's just got this mad energy, like I love that shit. I'm very aware of that stuff. So I'm always obviously respectful. And, my interpretation at that time, he just wanted to size me up, see if I was actually keen. But after that 30-minute conversation, he said, mate, I've spoken to powers that be. I've got a contract for you. So you can imagine how mind-blowing that was. I was just trying to reach out to the guy. Space of 2 weeks later, I'm guaranteed a contract at the Storm. So it was unbelievable.
Dude, I think that's really cool as well, like the way that you generally approach it. It's such a small thing we can do. I went for a walk with my missus on the weekend, just went for a cruise with our dog. We went to some random cafe we'd never been to before, and the food was hectic. The coffee was mad. And just walking on the way out, I like the barista, she was flat out making coffees, but she was the one like managing or owning the cafe. I'm not sure. I just said, that was all really good. The food was great and the coffee was really good too. And just that one moment that took me 2 seconds to say, She was so grateful for that. Thank you so much. That's like, I'm so glad you had a good experience. You can just see those little moments of kindness go a long way. You know what I mean? So I think it's cool, the little ripple effect for just little things like that. People
100%.
underappreciate the power of those sorts of moments.
And these are those small mindset shifts, and it's very relative to a lot of things. Like you're writing a book. Yeah. So
Big job.
Yeah, I can imagine. I do see myself doing something like that one day. My biggest issue where I'm at now is I have a lot of great conversations, and I'm very grateful for the space that I'm in, general population, exposure to all these people. And I think I've said this before, the altitude, the programming, the gym, the fat loss, the muscle gain, I don't really give a shit. What I care about is the opportunity to shift people's mindset away from all the negativity and the things that are holding them back. And when you start to see things a little bit differently, your perspective changes, you see opportunities, but also there's these things, and I think I said this before, strategically, and not to be disingenuous, but I understand the power of, say, messaging you out of the blue and saying, bro, I actually think I've done something like this just naturally, but just saying like, bro, I'm really proud of you and what you're doing. Like, it's awesome. If people could just understand the value of that, and that's one of a list of 100 actions, your life will significantly change. And
have you always been like that? Or is that part of your self-discovery journey you've gone on when you're going through all the adversity you have, overcoming those things? Or is that just the way you were raised by your mum?
I feel like I have, but if there's one thing I'm grateful for, and I think about this all the time, just for the way that I think, and I don't know how you pinpoint that, but self-awareness is the one thing that I'm so grateful that I have. And again, is it taught? Is it learned? Is it influenced? I don't know. But if there's one skill set that you can refine and work on and try and understand, it's the most powerful tool.
I was flicking through the podcast we did last year, this morning before this, and one part that I stopped on, and it's the same thing with me, I related to it so much. He said, the one thing I'm most grateful for is my mindset, right? And it's like, we try and unpack that. You do a lot of coaching with people. I do a lot of coaching with people. We try and analyze and have that self-awareness and think, how did I become this person that thinks that way? And I think there's an element of being able to break it down and understand it. But there's some ways who knows? Like, you just are the way you are. Have you been able to piece together the magic dust that makes you you?
I think it's a series of events. And everything, you firstly have to go back to the starting years. I kind of explain it, and the reason it's relative is because the other passion of mine in terms of altitude training we've spoken about before, we know that athletes use it, the best athletes in the world, to increase their fitness and their performance. Again, that's great, and I appreciate that, but altitude training is a controlled stress environment. There's nothing you need more in life than oxygen. So my thing, this is what I actually want to pioneer. I want to pioneer the altitude space being a controlled stress environment that could eventually be a therapeutic method for people with anxiety, depression, trauma, because what do they have? They have a hyperactive, the portion of your brain is called your amygdala. It's responsible for emotion and fear. And people who are anxious, it's hypervigilant. So they're always reacting. They're always very responsive. They're always in fight or flight. So what are we going to do? Okay, you could medicate them. That's not something we would really want to entertain. Counseling, psychology is great, talking about our issues. Can't fault that. But if we want to get them out of this, we're going to need to train them and rewire their neural patterns and their nervous system. So how do we do that? I'm not going to put them in an anxious situation, get them frustrated, trigger depression and trauma. But what I can do is I can take them into a controlled stress environment, trigger that fight or flight response, one of the most extreme survival responses, and then coach you to remain calm, regulate your emotions, and use the two tools that you have at your disposal, your thoughts and your breath. And I mean, I've had conversations. Recently I went to America, sat in a room with high-level scientists and professors, and I love their perspective. They're like, prove it. But they were listening, and it makes sense. And this is, if there's one pathway that I would like to forge, it would be pioneering that space and environment for that application. I just think it would be amazing.
Just a quick one from me. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'd know that after scaling Happy Skin Co. to over $10 million per year, I spent close to 18 months creating the Viral Brand Builder program, which teaches someone with zero experience how to launch and scale their very own e-commerce brand. With over 100 training videos and direct access to me, including one-on-one calls, you'll be guided throughout the entire process. Now, we already have a bunch of incredible results from students that are making multiple 5 and 6 figures per month. So if you want to learn how to build a business that has the potential to completely change your life, then click the link in the description and book in an application call today. Spots are limited as you'll be speaking directly to me. So hopefully I'll chat to some of you soon. But until then, let's get back to the podcast. It's really interesting. I've never heard anyone else speak about that, as a treatment for that, but it makes a lot of sense. one thing I mentioned to you before when you were just walking up the stairs was your heart rate variability is on average over 200, which for anyone that has a whoop is fucking, if anyone else is over 150, I'll fucking buy a dinner. Like I'm pretty fit. And if I get to 100, I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. Talk to me about all the benefits of altitude. I know you've been doing this for what, like 18 months or how long you've been training at altitude?
Now.
So you were training at altitude even before Airlocker became like a big thing?
I'd been exposed to it at multiple clubs, even back in Penrith Panthers, but with like a small unit and a mask.
Yeah.
So very restricting, a lot of limitations. Collingwood Football Club next to Melbourne had an altitude room. So I knew about it. I was exposed to it. But when Airlocker came about, it was obviously I went all in and really understood it. But it's very powerful. And so the thing, you'll appreciate this from a business perspective. This is the easiest way I can explain it from a blueprint. If you look at ice baths and saunas right now, and breath work, let's say breath work, there's nothing more trending in the health and wellness space. Like these are three things that are just going off. The revenue is ridiculous. There's products at home. There's recovery centers. It's insane. We're talking trillions of dollars of revenue in the wellness space. Now, 5 years ago, let's go back 5 years and talk about, we'll look at ice baths. I was doing this in a fucking rubbish bin at the Melbourne Storm. You know what I mean? In an ice bath. So what happened? Well, athletes do it, so it must be good. And then the science comes out. The Andrew Hubermans are talking about it. All right, well, I trust it. And then it goes influence. It's on every podcast. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's on Instagram with their cold shower. And all of a sudden, it becomes a movement. Now, you can't deny, even the little that you know about altitude, you can't deny that altitude's as beneficial, if not as cool as an ice bath. Mm-hmm. So you can't tell me that blueprint, that there's not an opportunity to create that same movement with altitude. But right now, it doesn't exist. So you can understand the optimism and the upside and the commitment to bringing this to life. But the last thing I want to say, saunas, ice bath, breath work, tell me the ice bath sauna brand. Tell me, what's the one? What's the one that stands out? There isn't one.
There's heaps, yeah.
You know what I mean? What's the brand? No one capitalized on that market. So this is, from a business perspective, why I think it's so powerful. But my perspective has changed a lot. To give some advice, and I'm still working on this, I am still someone that only really trades time for money. You know, everything that I do relies on my face time. I know the power of content and social media, but unfortunately, the way I'm wired up, and this comes back to those same things, all the good things I've picked up from my childhood and my life, I've also got some things that do hold me back. And this individual lifestyle that I've lived from a young age means I always put shit on my own back. I'll sacrifice myself to say yes and please others. And there is a limitation. So I feel like me breaking into that next space is, how do I build a platform around myself to then pioneer the movement that is altitude? And this is kind of where my mind's at in the future.
You've already got the platform. You just need to figure out what's your model to move forward. Because like you said, you've got, we were chatting before we started recording, you've got your fingers in a lot of different pies. You're here, there, and you're everywhere, right? You rely on your energy and your being to drive everything that you're involved in. But where do you want to take this? Like, you've got so many different things on. With your platform and the community you've built around your interests and passions and your philosophy, your mindset, your training, the way you approach health, once you just figure what that little vehicle is that you're going to run forward with, bro, I'm telling you, I was telling you what some things I was doing there. With your size community, you'll be able to fly, bro.
And animal fuel's been a great experiment in some ways. At the end of the day, I've eaten like this for 4 years. Firstly, show me, like, where's the education? Lots of people ask me, and then connecting with a guy called Lockie from Take Action Training, again, lives out west. He's an online coach doing great things. I was like, finally, there's a doer that I can align with, and I have my skill set, but there's things that I can't do. And we've brought it to life, and now it's exposed me, like, make the content, do it consistently. Build a scaled resource that people can actually find out some information. So it's forced me to dive into this space, something that I've always known about, something that I'll probably tell other people to do. But from a business perspective, it's been a great journey in a small window of time that has finally given me the understanding and knowledge of, like, I think you could blow up any brand, and you would agree with this, with the right content strategy, the right marketing. Like, it really can be that simple.
Right now in 2024 and as we move into 2025, if you're starting a new brand, particularly if you're doing something in more of the digital space, content is 90% of the game.
Yep.
Right? Content, and build a community, and then you can do whatever you want with it, right? I was looking at animal fuel. What is the business model? Because right now I jumped on your thing. I've got a lot of actual questions to break down some of this stuff that I'm really keen to get your thoughts on. I think I've kind of been on this discovery journey of health, and something that's become more and more important to me as I get older and as you see all the Hubermans of the world and the Dave Aspreys and what's that page, like Carnivore Aurelius, I'm sure you follow them, like all this shit. And it's like, you see it at the start, you're like, what is this shit? But then you look into it and you're like, wow, the way that the world has been structured with a lot of this stuff is not to make us healthy, it's to keep us sick. So I think it's a big movement, which we'll talk about. But what's the goal with that? I downloaded your animal fuel guide, 35 pages of gold in that. So if you enjoy this podcast and some of this stuff we talk about, it's in your Instagram bio, download it, it's great. But where are you going with that? Is there going to be physical products? Is it a coaching? Is it an education platform? It seems right now it's like all about educating people. But where are you going to take animal fuel? What's the goal with it?
Yeah, look, if I reflect back on Airlocker, I was always like, this is my dream platform. I just want to have exposure and impact as many people as possible. And you know what? There was probably an argument 5 years ago that was hyper relevant. But every year that goes on, there's far better ways to do it with a much more scaled approach. And I do sit back a little bit envious of the online coaches of the world, seeing how much access they can get. And not only from a business and financial perspective, like front end work means that you can scale your information, your wisdom, and have a far greater impact. So animal fuel was like that trigger. And like I said, I started this journey. This is what I do. I live and breathe it, but where's the information? Where's the resources? Where's the education? So that's kind of how it started out. Animal fuel, the goal was to kind of be the face of this space.
Yeah.
The last, say, year to 3 years, anyone in the health and fitness space, online coaches, has been all flexible dieting, right? So it's like calories in, calories out, blah, blah, blah. And they all follow the same suit. It's very rare that someone comes out ballsy and is willing to go left when everyone's going right. Now, Whole Foods is the new direction that is kind of becoming more popular. People are willing to speak about. Carnivore is another one, but it's a little bit left field, a little bit niche. Animal-based is a blend between prioritizing animal proteins and whole foods, and we kind of want to capture that market and space, be a trusted, credible resource. We started out by just documenting our own journey, as you do, a free resource to try and build a database and a community. And now we're going to drop our first guide, which is the Animal Edge Protocol, which is training, nutrition, habits, lifestyle, and it's ridiculous. Like, I'm sure you've bought an ebook before or followed someone and tried to grab a course. This thing is off its head, and it's all the information and education you'll ever need. So really proud of it, but really cool to launch a scaled product and see what we can do.
Where did this start for you? You said 3-4 years you've been on this diet.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst?
So
did you try any other diets before this? What did it look like before you moved on to this, by the way?
I have dabbled in a few different things. I remember injuries have always been the inspiration, where I've looked and gone, what do I need to change? Anthony Minicello, I don't know if you ever heard him talk about his diet.
I saw a clip from the Mark Boris podcast he did, like how fucking drilled in he is. Yeah.
So I was at the Roosters. He brought this in and everyone completely changed. So he only eats slow cooked meat. His protein shakes are raw milk and eggs. He wouldn't have Gatorade out on the field. He'd have coconut water with salt. And I was like, holy shit. So that was my first exposure. I'm eating raw meat with this guy. You know what I mean? So
he grew up down the road from me, by the way, from Preston's. His parents had a farm, out there.
And I mean, you look, just like anything, you look at Minnie and I was just like, well, whatever he's doing, I want to do. But he did it because he had that chronic lower back injury. And he's like, I need to make a change. And he was influenced by a guy called Aaron, I forget his last name, but he had a gym in Bondi. And that was kind of that keto caveman diet movement at that time. So I was at the Melbourne Storm and again, just battling with injuries. And I was like, I've heard about it. I've been told about it. The carnivore diet was really prevalent at that time. But basically acknowledging that, is there anything more important than the shit that we put in our mouth every single day? You know, the guy that you might have seen on our page, Lockie, he's got Crohn's disease.
I saw his story. I was going to ask you, share if you can a little bit about his
100%.
story.
So he's got Crohn's disease, just a knockabout lad and completely relative to most people that are listening to this podcast. He was fit. He's eaten pretty good his whole life. He's had that bro mentality, bodybuilding, but he partied on weekends. Anyway, the stress built up and the autoimmune disease, which is Crohn's disease, got to a point where he was hospitalized. Now, the crazy thing about this is in that appointment, he was offered medication. He was offered surgery. Not one conversation about nutrition. This is a gut disorder, which is mind-blowing. So he went on the journey to go carnivore first, and he's doing all that. Mine started from an injury perspective. So we were in COVID. We all lived in a hotel up in the Sunshine Coast. I went and bought a barbecue. I had a guy there from Bucock's Quality Meats up there, and he would bring me my box of meat every week, and I would just cook up all my own meat on the barbecue on my veranda Did that for about 3-4 months and then continued on and then went into the animal-based diet, which is a little bit more diverse: fruit, meat, eggs, honey, avocado, some milk and dairy, and just been maintaining that long term, and I've reaped the benefits and the rewards.
What are some of the benefits that you've experienced going onto that diet?
Yeah, I think the first thing was obviously performance and inflammation. Like they were my two key markers. So I'll detail one story. When I started it, we were in season, right? So I got some support from a guy called Origins Nutrition, a guy that lives in Bali. He directed me through that first phase, but I went cold turkey. So I went from eating a typical athlete diet, muesli bars, pastas, rice, all the bullshit, all the carbs, and just cut it and basically got fat adapted for 2 weeks. I was going to training, couldn't tell anyone because they'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? And I would sprint 10 meters and feel like I was going to pass out, but I just had to like brave face it. Anyway, the first time I played a game on this diet, the protocol was, I do all my meat and I'm only eating meat. I'm only carnivore. I had a piece of sourdough midweek with some bone marrow on it. And then I had yogurt before the game. Now, game day was steak and eggs and then a steak at lunch. And I'm used to getting to the game and having all this pasta and all this shit. So I was freaking out, to be honest. I was like, fuck, surely, how am I going to play on just a steak? Got to the game and I felt $1 million. I was bouncing off the walls. The reflection of that in the past, we sit in the hotel all day. Had fucking 15 hours of sleep. But then you go to the lunchroom, you have all this pasta, all this shit, and I'm getting to the game and I'm lethargic. I was like, how is this happening? So that contrast was a massive slap in the face. We're like, holy shit. That I needed that evidence to change my belief system, right?
So the difference between carnivore is strictly just meat, and what do you animal based? What do you call this now? Like
animal based.
Animal based. I looked at so obviously you get a lot of raw honeys and things like
that.
So you do.
What's a normal day of food?
What's a normal day for a lot of fruits, right?
Yeah, a lot of fruits.
So they tried to demonize fruits as well at one point.
Like, there's a lot of information. The hardcore carnivores would not be advocates for animal based either. And I think carnivore diet as an elimination diet is necessary for a lot of people, especially people with poor gut and autoimmune disease, like 100%. Yeah. But it's even a great thing to do as a process of elimination, similar to what you're going to do, obviously reverse engineered from a plant perspective, but then you start reintroducing foods and you can actually get an understanding of what affects you, what triggers you, what you shouldn't be eating. So it is beneficial and I'm glad I did it. But animal-based eating, in my perspective, from a performance level, I think I operate better with some carbohydrates. Now, what carbohydrates is the next question. So there's a selection of carbohydrates and then it's my timing. I'm not grazing on them all day. I'm not constantly hungry. I'm using them to fuel my workouts and optimize my performance. So typical day of eating for me, and I'm a creature of habit. So not everyone will eat the same way as I do. People freak out because I have berries in my mints and all this other shit.
Yeah, I saw that.
I wake up and I have a high protein, high fat breakfast. So I have 500 grams of mints, 2 to 4 eggs. Then sometimes I have to remind myself to eat because I'm full. I'm not thinking about food. Gone are the days where every 2-3 hours I'm ravenous. I'm chasing carbs all the time. I'll have the same meal at lunch. And then in the afternoon, depending on when I train, I'll have like a banana or some dates or some honey. Then after I train, sometimes I'll have some Greek yogurt and again, load that up with a little bit of fruit. And then dinner is generally some sort of meat, slow cooked meat or 500 grams of steak. And I'll have either some fermented fruits, sauerkraut, or a little bit of pumpkin. And that's my diet. And again, like you can answer honestly, I don't think I'm on a diet. Yeah. You're on a diet. I'm just, as you know, I'm eating healthy food, but it's weird that like someone eating just good whole foods is seen as the weird one on a diet. Like, no, I'm not on a diet.
Yeah. I'm a creature of habit too. So I can eat the same shit every day and not get sick of it. The thing for me, and talk to me about your experience with this, I'd love to know. And I'm keen. And also when I go back to eating meat here and there, I'm not going to go, all right, from never eating meat to I'm just only going to eat. I'm going to try things slowly and reintroduce them, see how I feel. But also back then I was eating random steak from Coles and bullshit.
There's levels.
I've got a few mates that are hunters and they get like wild elk. And like before I never knew about, grass-fed, grass-finished steak and the difference between something from Coles or Woolies versus a proper butcher from a proper farm. So I want to do it differently and start to introduce these things. But the major reason for me, as I said, with my martial arts, I felt better not eating meat. I love the feeling of feeling light. Like feeling light inside. Like if I had to go run a half marathon, if I had to go do a big session of martial arts, if I can't eat at least 2 hours before, I'd rather not eat at all. And I'd rather train empty because I feel like I can do that. But if I have something heavy in my stomach, I feel fucked. How was that experience with you? Because carbohydrates, while they're obviously a lot of people don't like them, they're much easier to digest and burn through. That's why people get hungry really quickly. Yeah. For me, it doesn't matter. I've never put on an ounce of fat in my life. But did you not feel heavy at all when you went to only meat? Like that shit takes longer to digest?
I think there is a misconception with the whole digesting and heaviness conversation.
I'm not educated, so hit me with
what you're saying is based off your experience, which
genuinely.
is a valid conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just say the same, which is my experience. I'll tell you what is heavy. Heavy is pastas, rices, potato, all this shit. And again, I'm not demonizing those foods, but I feel, and especially I put a lot of weight. Like a strong commodity for me these days is energy, productivity, and focus.
For sure.
Maybe more important than my abs and my body composition, right? That's the thing that I value so much. So I'm not willing to have this big meal for the sake of performance or aesthetics and then be lethargic and useless. So like what I would say, let's just say hypothetically you were going to train. You've had your lunch. I don't feel heavy. I don't feel lethargic. You're not then going to have this big portion of meat before you train. You're actually going to have some fast-acting carbohydrates. We're talking bananas, honeys, dates. You won't even know that you've eaten, but you'll have the fuel and energy, especially when you're working at a high intensity, because obviously our energy system and fuel is going to be glycogen and carbohydrates. So I think the misconception and the thing that we are taught and learn is that when we eat meat, it doesn't digest and we feel heavy. I get it, and I've heard the same narrative. But what I can say is the opposite is true.
And like you said and what I've said with my experience, the reason I got to, eating the same things for breakfast, the same things before training, you try different things, listen to your body, see what works for you in terms of timing. What I just took from what you just said is like the timing of when you eat and what you eat was a big thing. Now, let's talk about another common, maybe it's a misconception. I'm sure it's different for different people. One of the drawbacks of like an animal-based or definitely carnivore diet, everyone says you stink and you have smelly farts. Is that true? Can you confirm or deny? What's that like?
Again, these are great questions. When I first started, hardcore carnivore, first thing that happened, I didn't go to the toilet for 4 days.
Okay.
Right. So you either have turbo shits or you're constipated. Now, the funny thing about that was, as you know, in COVID, we were all flying private. So we were on a private plane to Sydney, and then the first time I needed to go to the toilet hit. And I done a number on that private plane toilet. Now, the thing
Who's
about
up next, boys?
I feel sorry for whoever was next. But you don't, this is the crazy thing. One thing that you gain is a new reference point. When you eat the way, say, I've been eating, clean food, whole foods, good quality meat, good quality products, when you eat something like eat out or eat anything random, hot, boom, your guts are fucked, you're farting flat stick. I don't fart eating the way that I do. It's the opposite, which is hard for people to understand because they only know what they know or the information they've consumed, but it's actually the opposite.
So what would your opinion be? I don't know if you've tried this. Like, let's just say you were going after your diet, but you're eating the Capilano honey that's full of sugar and you're eating grain-fed steak from Coles. What sort of experience do you think that would give? It's not going to be the same in terms of performance and feeling, but what's your perspective around the quality of the ingredients rather than just what you're eating?
It's massive. But again, all you need to do is if you were to go on one side and have quality produce, quality ingredients, and then you transition to the opposite, the things that you just mentioned, instantly you will feel it. Not only in your energy and the way you feel, your guts are cooked. Instantly you'll feel it. And that is the moment that you need to be like, wow. Because I can tell you and you can read about it, you can hear about it, but when you feel it from having anything that is off good quality produce or the foods that we're talking about, then that's the light bulb moment for you to go, oh shit. But if you're only eating this space of food, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Even for us, like Mel's a psycho with like clean ingredients and she's been veggie for even longer than me, I think 6 or 7 years. Sunday, like by the time we've had the weekend, you're not as strict with your diet. You go out, you eat there. Monday morning, oh shit, it's the worst day of the week for that sort of stuff. So I think definitely can relate to that experience. But let me ask you this, because some people will hear this. I've got mates that have been on the same sort of diet as you for a while now. But for those that, are interested in the benefits, but maybe they're not as extreme, they're not as dedicated, and they're not going to go full steam ahead like you do, what are some, let's break it down into two different questions. First question, what sort of foods or ingredients should people be avoiding in their diet just to make some positive changes? And then what sorts of ingredients or foods do you think that people could increase in their diet to make their, mood, energy levels, performance feel better?
Great question. First thing, very simple, remove processed foods. Just that simple. Absolute game changer. And for the average person, remember, I used to eat healthy, what I perceived as healthy, what we all perceive as healthy, and there's levels to health. What I'm doing should not be perceived as extreme, but it is. Which is ridiculous. But remove any processed foods, nothing in a packet. The ingredient should be one single ingredient, not a list of 40 things and half of them that you can't even read. So remove processed foods. And look, there's going to be people who are like, oh, you need flexibility and this and that. I'm not against that. I don't need to be the one to condone it because I don't see it as this hard task filled with discipline to just eat good quality food. So I'm not going to campaign and propone that, even with the clients that I work with who are on the other end of the spectrum, who have a lot of weight to lose. Yes, I'll look for some quick wins, but if we talk about a quick win, just remove processed foods. That's the biggest one you can do. Now, second part of your question is increase protein. Most people that I've seen, and as you mentioned, I've worked with a lot of people, they're not getting enough protein. And to go one step further in terms of implementation, try having a high protein, high fat meal for breakfast and watch your day completely change. You're satiated and your energy.
It's the complete opposite to what we're told to do, right? Grains, bread, cereals for breakfast.
And like, look, you can go, I love conspiracy theories anyway, but you can go down that path and call this a conspiracy theory, but surely don't be that person that still tries to deny that everything in the world is geared and set up to have a positive impact on us. Like, you don't need to be a genius to realize that, unfortunately, most things are driven by profit or some sort of gain. And then the opposite to that is, or the thing in parallel to that is, there's so much food volume that the quality drops. And this is just the world that we live in.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or you got something out of it, do yourself a favor, do me a favor, do your friends a favor and share this with them, and they can come along on this journey with us. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.